That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Hello, and welcome back to that podcast at the intersection of faith and fear, where every week, especially this year, and especially this episode, we discuss what scares us in order to find what saves us. This is the fear of God. Speaking to you right now is one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse, and typically with me is fellow co-host Reed Lackey. And he was here, guys, but he was in a bit of a mood. And you know, Lackey in a mood is not, you got to let him have the space. So he said he needed to blow off some steam on his motorbike. And when I said, I didn't think you had a motorbike, he got even more huffy, bike joke, and said he was just going to go play Excite Bike on his Nintendo Classic instead, his NES Classic. I'm like, okay, whatever you need, man. Look out for kids. In the meantime, allow me to welcome you, constant listeners, into our big series for the year, What Scares Us / What Saves Us, a series defined by you. You've been submitting your stories of films and media that instilled or stoked a certain fearful imagining in you, and we are going to be covering them here on the show starting today. Super exciting. This week, everyone, we are going to be excavating the fragile psyche of our own Dr. Readin with his submission, Pumpkinhead. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Oh, because here at the Fear of God, we explore. We don't explain, except for right now. When I explain that you can listen to the Fear of God at your nearest podcast platform, you can watch the Fear of God on the old YouTube, and you can browse the Fear of God on the web at thefearofgodpodcast.com, while you will find Reed. Hey, buddy. No.
Trying to create my own Doppler effect. I don't know if it worked. But the little application that I'm using just asked me, are you playing music right now?
I just saw that. No, that's Zoom, the little application. It's the worldwide global phenomenon called Zoom. I've never seen that before. And then it said, set up a professional audio mechanism. What in the world?
No, I was not. I guess I just, have those melodic tones whenever I'm trying to intimate a motorcycle. And so, there it is. There it is. There it was. There it went. There it ran over a poor child. Riri. Oh, man.
Reed.
Hi. Hey, buddy.
We're here.
I can't believe it.
What scares us?
This series.
Starting with you.
I'm so scared. So this is a great series. I'm really looking forward to diving into some of these. We've had some great submissions from listeners. Some of these films I haven't seen. Some of the films I haven't seen in a really long time, and some of them I've been itching to get to on the pod. So it's gonna be a grand old time. I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm really excited to dive into to this week's, because this is one of my favorite horror films, and we're not talking about it yet, but because probably have a little business to do first. But yeah, that's
it's business time.
It is. It's business.
It's business. It's business time. I'm just saying, if it's going to be like, do you want to play some audio?
Oh, are
you going to pay for that? So yeah, it's business time. So Reed, we together, and then you put the finishing touches on a little promotional spot. Look at us.
I can't believe it.
We're
awesome.
We're bona fide.
I'm a Dapper Dan, man.
I am the DD paterfamilias. So yeah, we've got a commercial. You can go to
that's crazy.
Where I know it lives is on iTunes. Right at the top of the feed, it says Fear of God podcast promo. It's a little commercial. You can share it with your friends, share it with your mama, share it with your daddy.
It's amazing.
Let people know the show exists. And be like, this is that thing, guys, that I've been telling you about for 4 years, but I didn't want to share a 2-hour show with you. So here's that 30 seconds. It's like me watching a 30-minute TV show. You'll be like, oh,
I can do this.
30 seconds of Reed and Nathan. Anybody can endure that. So yeah, that has happened. That is in your feed. That is a thing we would love if you would go share with people. So Reed, we're starting this new series. Are there ways? Are we still after things from people?
Yes. So we're starting right now, and we already have a lot of the episodes that we're going to cover programmed already, but it is never too late to go to thefearofgodpodcast.com, click on the banner on the top, and submit your own edition of what scares you. We want to hear your personal stories about any media, whether that be film, TV, books, music, anything that kind of freaked you out or gives you the heebie-jeebies. We want to hear the story about it. And you can use that platform as an opportunity to pitch to us things that you would like for us to cover on the show. We would love that. And I don't think, even after this series, I don't think that avenue is really going to go away. You're going to have a platform to be able to say, hey, Fear of God hosts, we'd really love for you to cover this thing. So by all means, go to the fearofgodpodcast.com. Tell us what scares you. You've got plenty of time still. We've got lots of submissions already, but we could always use more. So yeah, by all means, go and submit that. And you're the lucky guy. We drew your name out of the hat for this week. That's right.
We do 2 quick bullet points. One is the Facebook group. Come join the Facebook group where we have lovely ribald conversation. Specifically around Dave Courtney's disappointment over not covering the relic for 2020.
Last week's episode got so much heat for all the wrong reasons. Everybody was like, what?
Wait a minute.
And I gotta shout out to our listener Jacob, who was like, yeah, I actually went to Redbox to pick up a movie that they weren't covering, and everything. And I felt so bad because I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm really like humbled that anybody would try to like pre-prep for the show, because we always ask you to and everything. But I just felt so bad that they did that, and we promise we'll make it up.
And we burned him, and now he's like, nah, not anymore. Done.
Right. He's like, nope, no more. Now I'm gonna wait till day of release, and then I'm not listening to you until later. But no, it was fun in the Facebook. It
was fun. So come join the Facebook group. We have a grand old time, sometimes at each other's expense. Also, Riri, we hit 79 on the reviews.
I couldn't believe it.
We did it.
I couldn't believe we got a new review. I was like,
I've gotten real complacent. I'm like, it's not gonna happen. Then you're like, 79. I'm like, whoa.
It's like a Christmas miracle in February. So yeah, that was very, very kind.
It was lovely, and you and I are now prepping for our Fear of God stage production of Muppets Christmas Carol featuring Lackey and Nady.
It's amazing.
Oh,
Lackey and Nady. Whoa. Change.
So yes, go leave an iTunes review, and just email us your suggestion for what should be on the 2021-2022 Fog Theater production season. Riri, I haven't asked you this in a while, but I just got to know what you watching, what you reading, so much. What are you listening to?
Oh my gosh, I hadn't heard it in the reel.
I know.
In so long.
I was scouring a minute ago. I was like, nah, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna go for it. Just for old time's sake. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that was so
Look
lovely
at that.
to hear. It's good to have
I'm
you
back.
back. Yeah, it's good to have you back. So, in answer to your question, yeah, reading so much. I'm loving it. So the book that I wanted to mention for this week is yeah, it's just I've been watching TV shows too. It's all been about the Muppet Show lately, but my on Disney Plus. But my but no, I just finished a book called All That's Good, subtitled Rediscovering the Lost Art of Discernment. It's by a writer named Hannah Anderson. And her book was just so lovely. And in that way that sometimes you're, I'm gonna say this because this was my experience of just sort of the feeling that I got while I was reading the book. Like in that way that your spirit sometimes just needs a really cold drink of water, like very refreshing and just really like, it's just, it's a nice sense of things. It is not, and this is what I really appreciated about it. It is not some like formulaic, these are the 5 talking points about how to develop discernment. But one of my favorite things about the book is she talks about how discernment in our vernacular is usually used as a gauge for caution, that basically of saying like, oh, show some discernment. You got to show some discernment. Don't go where it's dangerous, and don't do all of this, that, and the other. But what I love so much about Hannah Anderson's book is that from the very first chapter, she reframes it and says, no, discernment is the art of developing a palate for what is good. and for developing a taste for what is good. That's the art of discernment. And then she proceeds in her guidance and instruction and observations to then unpack, these are the ways that you cultivate goodness in your life and continue to bring goodness into your life. And again, it was just such a refreshing reading experience. This was my first thing that I've read by her, but I enjoyed the book so much. I've put 2 other books that she's written on my radar to eventually check out, and I think it's a really, really wonderful book, and it's very refreshing, and I think would be very valuable to give you some pointers on exactly how to navigate your life and just learn to cultivate a bit more goodness in it. So it's just called All That's Good: Rediscovering the Lost Art of Discernment by Hannah Anderson, and it's a book I highly recommend. I love it.
All right. I'm going slower than I'd like on this task, but I've been trying to watch not just the current Golden Globe nomination films, but also what I anticipate will end up being the Oscar films. And just recently, my wife and I watched from that list, The Trial of the Chicago 7. Have you seen that yet?
I have not. That's the Aaron Sorkin. I know he wrote it. Did he direct it as well?
He did.
Okay. Yeah, got it.
I thought it was okay. Now, and I think I've expressed this on the show before, it's always hard when you know it's already in contention, like your expectations are really screwed with at that point.
Right.
So I may not have a super fair read on that film, but I thought it was okay. It's now, interestingly, the events of the film take place pretty concurrent, not pretty, though the narratives don't completely bleed over each other. The film Judas and the Black Messiah,
interesting,
historically takes place at the exact same time.
That's interesting,
because the climax of Judas and the Black Messiah, which I won't spoil if you haven't seen it,
haven't yet,
is a real event that gets referenced as having just happened in Chicago 7.
Trial of Chicago 7. Wow. Maybe a better feature then.
Watch Black Messiah second then, because it's a much better film.
Got it. Yeah.
And that's where I was building to. It's like having those speaking to each other the way they are as historical attempts. And I like Sorkin. I love West Wing. I like Sorkin generally speaking. I like the performers in this. It was one of the first few times I felt like, man, you're trying. You know, and that's fine. And again, bias is happening because I know it's in the conversation, and so an extra level of scrutiny is being applied by me, subconsciously or otherwise. But yeah, I would say it's fine. I would still say Judas and the Black Messiah, for given its place historically in terms of the actual time frame it assesses, is a far better film and far more interesting and engaging. But yeah, I'm not like down on Chicago 7. I just
sure
was like, okay, well,
I've just not quite down with it either.
Check the box. Sure.
Yeah.
But that
has been another installment of What You Watching. What You Readin.
Bring it home.
What are you listening to? Oh, man.
So Reed, we're kicking the door down. We're digging it up.
No.
We're revving the bike.
Oh, my gosh.
We're, going back for the feed or the seed, or the feed and the seed, whatever it is.
One of those things.
One of those things. We're starting What Scares Us, and we're getting to you. Like you're under the microscope today. My brother.
It's
and
too
friend.
much intimidation.
We are going to be, because people are submitting these stories, right, of their experience of the thing that scared them.
Sure.
Some narrative around that. And so next week we've got a special treat as far as that goes. But for today's story, I wanted to share one of a film we have covered. So it's not a film we would engage during the actual series, but it's
right.
I want to share these stories, and this is a good opportunity here at the front to kick us off to get you ready for you.
Oh boy.
So friend of the Fog, artist extraordinaire Jacob Hunt submitted his What Scares Us story, and it's about the film The Ring, which we did cover, that Sir Stephen Beckley, who just got knighted on the show, you're welcome, could tell us what episode that was. However, what I'm going to do is share Jacob's story because it's a great one. And when we started pitching this, it's the kind of thing I was like, this is the kind of stuff I want back. So Jacob shares in his What Scares Us: watching The Ring was my scariest film going experience. He put scariest in quotes. Though it had a few of the standard jump scares, what really got to me was the oppressive feeling of dread that hung over the entire film. The tension was so tense that at some point I realized I was actually, for the first time that I can recall, on the edge of my seat. I looked over at my friend Brendan, and he too is on the edge of his seat. Weeks later, I received a chilling phone call asking in a shaky voice who was at our apartment and whether we were in for the night. Well, Brendan and I are here, I responded. I thought I knew who was on the phone, but had to ask to be certain it was my other roommate, Blake. Turns out he had just finished watching The Ring with his girlfriend.
Oh my God.
And was so terrified that he didn't want to come home if no one else was there. I assured him we'd be around, hung up, and then shared the odd experience with Brendan, expressing my determination to exploit Blake's vulnerability. Inspiration came quickly, and I grabbed a recordable VHS tape, blacked out its label, and slipped it under Blake's pillow. The next day, with zero appreciation expressed in his tone, he described how, finally having worked up the courage to return home, he crawled into bed in the darkness, felt the cold rectangle of plastic under his pillow, held it up in the dim light chopped through by window blinds, and with a shriek, tossed the blackened VHS tape across the bedroom. So that is Jacob's story of The Ring, and his tension at watching it and his scaring his roommate.
That was amazing.
Anyway, thank you, Jacob, for submitting your story. I'm going to do that again. Thank you, Jacob, for submitting your What Scares Us. And I think this is just such a great entry point into this series, which, you know, when you and I were crafting this, you know, we never totally know how these things are going to go when we need audience response. And so there was a little bit of trepidation on our part. Like, I really hope people respond. Maybe we should have Reed kick us off so we can pad it a little if we need it too. But here we are. And I just love that we're going to have some of these stories that we're going to be able to share in tandem with the actual films we're covering. And so
it's exciting.
We did choose to lead off with you, my friend. So here we are, talking about Stan Winston's Pumpkinhead. So why don't you set us up a little bit for this? Yeah,
there definitely could be, like, as I was rattling through the, you know, my memories of like, what would I want to bring up that was something that scared me or freaked me out when I was younger and want to sort of pivot onto this series. But honest to God, the very first thing that came to mind and the most prominent thing that came to mind as I thought through, if I were going to do this, what would I do? It was always Pumpkinhead. That was always the very first thing that I wanted. And I can share a bit of a story. I can't remember at what age I saw this film. And you had never seen it before I asked you to,
Nope.
Right? Okay. And so I don't remember. I would have at least been probably 10 or 11 years old, somewhere in that regard. But the distinct memory that I have is of acquiring this at a video store, which is why I'm not quite certain what the circumstances were, because I would have had to acquire it at a video store when I was like, I might have been as old as maybe like 12 or something like that, but I know I was not fully a teenager yet. And I got it somehow at a video store, but I don't know that my parents would have like totally let me rent Pumpkinhead, you know.
You're like, it's the great Pumpkinhead, Mom.
Right, sure. But I did, my first job when I was in like older high school was at a video store.
Sure.
But I don't think this was when I watched this. I think I was much younger, because the distinct memory that I have is of being in my bedroom, and specifically, and I wrote the scene down. It could come up later in scares, but specifically the moment when it's in the moonlit night and it's on the road, and that image far down the road of Pumpkinhead kind of ambling towards the at that point 3 of the teens who have kind of survived, and the other guy who's refusing to let them use his truck. And do you remember this moment?
At what point? Kind of late.
It's probably before the last third of
their truck. Oh, yeah.
So they want to take his
when
truck
Ed shows
away.
up.
Yes. It's right before Ed shows up to take. But that image before Ed engages him and starts shooting at him, where Pumpkinhead is ambling down the road to him, just that image of the creature in its sort of full glory just freaked the crap out of me. And I remember thinking, I didn't necessarily like specifically have nightmares about it, but Pumpkinhead was always in the films that I had watched since then. There's more iconic sort of monsters around that are just like, Jason and Leatherface and Freddy and all these guys. But there has always been a special place in my heart, specifically for the creature design and execution of Pumpkinhead, because I guess from when I saw him, from when I was so young. But there was also, and I don't want to dive too deep on this, because this is the kind of thing that will come up when we get into the more substantive thematic things, but it was the story itself as well. The notion of this man who has been done terribly wrong, and then the means by which he tries to reconcile his grief with some form of control and action, being, unleashing this literal demon into the world. And that really unsettled me in a lot of ways that still inform some of my thought processes around my skepticism about the myth of redemptive violence, or my notions about the imperative of forgiveness and all of these kinds of things. It is, perhaps ironically, a lot of it, the closest and easiest metaphor I can go to is, well, see, there's the story called Pumpkinhead, and and some of what's baked into it. So that was why it was always at the top of my list if I knew I was going to be engaging with this series specifically and saying this is my entry. I knew it was going to be Pumpkinhead, because I've been dying to talk about it on the show, and there's just never been a great intersection until now to really input it into our series. So I have some, I have trivial bits, and I have, all the nines on it, but I want to know your thoughts on it, because this was your first time seeing it. And I think went in with like no prep beforehand. I don't know what you knew about the show or didn't.
And then I saw Lance Henriksen's sweaty toned physique at the top. I was like, damn, Lance. That's not how you looked in Millennium. Yeah. Wow. No, I really didn't know anything about it other than your affinity for it. And no, I found it very it's so funny knowing the reason we're talking about this is this existential splinter in your psyche from 11 is what I was about to say. Is no, it's pretty delightful actually. There you go. That's pretty demented to say.
No, I kind of get it though. Like I watch it for pure enjoyment now. But yeah, no, keep going. I didn't.
Well, it almost had this. I don't know if maybe I'm overlaying too much on it, but there was almost, now it's set effectively in the real world, sort of, but the score, because I didn't know what I was getting. So my attitude is being shaped literally as I'm taking it in. And so what I didn't know was that it would have this kind of, it almost has like, think like Labyrinth, Never-Ending Story, Willow kind of energy to the like score specifically.
Sure. Yeah. Of course.
Some of that energy about it. And so that helped kind of feed that word of delightful. So in other words, it's not just this pure, like, Nightmare on Elm Street's serial killer-esque tale. It really doesn't,
Right,
to me,
right.
quite fit that mold, even though it fits a lot of the trappings. Like there is a
Sure.
sort of final girl aspect to it. There's methodical kills by a malevolent entity. So
Right.
but the him trying to interrupt the circuit that he's set in motion adds that fantastical kind of mythic
Absolutely.
aspect to it. So what?
No, I was just gonna say that's one of my favorite aspects of the film. I have got to. I recently read the book We Need to Talk. I got to stop interrupting and making this conversation all about me. but there's a lot of as I kind
You're
of
in good company with interruptions, so
as I kind of prepped with Vast of Night. This is a film about which I would acknowledge and recognize its flaws. I don't think it's a perfect film, but in my heart sits with incredible affection. I love this. It's one of my favorite horror films.
Let's talk about that for a minute. I mean,
sure.
I want you to get to the true bits you want to get to, but also want to just follow where the spirit and the pumpkin lead. The way you just said that, it's not a perfect film, but I accept its flaws, essentially, something like that. I think that we can sometimes do ourselves a disservice. So I just referenced Trial of the Chicago 7.
Oh, sure.
That's a movie operating at the peak of the careers of the people involved. In other words,
sure.
Of that film, you could say it's not perfect, but I forgive its flaws.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm trying to juxtapose here is, no film is perfect, so we set that aside, but I wouldn't call necessarily what is transpiring in Pumpkinhead production-wise flaws. I would call them innovation in the face of a thin budget. And on top of that, not just innovation, but excellence.
Well, and let me...
It's last thought there, but because I want you to go that. It is dated, so sure, you're naturally going to have limitations based on watching this 35 years later.
Sure, right.
So those limitations are inherent to just age, but I would not call this, because you use the word its flaws. I don't think there really is much to point to. Here are the flaws of Pumpkinhead. It's a pretty airtight story and narrative and script.
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
I don't love just how dilapidated some of the poor people stuff is, just because it's so like, okay, you really had $0, didn't you? This all went to this costume, which is great and effective and worth it. But please do say what you were going to say with some energy.
No, what I would acknowledge, like I could come and it would not be difficult. Like for instance, if we were entering this conversation and I was like, oh my God, I love this movie. And then the person I was talking to was like, oh my God, I love it too. Then we would just have like a 2-hour conversation about like just how much unbridled affection we have for the movie. If I was talking to somebody and trying to put a bit more of an objective hat on, I'd be like, okay, some of the dialogue is a bit too direct, like some of the, because, and this is one of the fascinating, like from a script perspective, it's one of those fascinating things where I feel like the story, as you put it, and I totally agree, is airtight. Like the story, the narrative is near perfect, but the dialogue in the midst of that narrative, I think probably could have a little bit more flavor of some more nuanced characterization and stuff.
God bless Mama, Diddy, and my farm.
yeah, like that.
Well, but here's the thing. This thought just came to me. Juxtapose this with all love to its fans, but Phantasm. That's a movie I would say it could easily be said it's not a perfect film, but I forgive its flaws. Now, that's not necessarily my opinion, but in other words, I don't love Phantasm the way some people would, but a defender of Phantasm could say, you know what? It's hokey. It feels a little unrealized in some places, but I can overlook those quote unquote flaws and find something I really enjoy. I don't think that can as readily be applied to this. I do think what is in Pumpkinhead is meant to be there, and what is there is meant to tell you a thing, versus some of what's in Phantasm. Like, I don't know if you meant for that to be in there.
Right. So what I love
does that
about
comparison make sense?
Oh, it absolutely does. And what I love so much about this is that I was prepared in my heart and mind to have to prop up my affection for this film. Knowing and what is beautiful about the moment that's happening is here I am like, oh my God, this is one of my favorite horror movies. And you've now talked me into it. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to qualify it. Yeah. I love this movie. I love everything about it. I do think that and this is the part of what was in the what scares me thing. This creature design is perfect. It's
epic.
The creature design is amazing. Like, to get into the details is amazing.
Speak real quick. Don't attempt to control yourself. But so I'm familiar by virtue of the legend of the name of Stan Winston, and so I knew going in, I was like, okay, if nothing else, and I had no idea what I was getting into. If nothing else, I'm going to appreciate the visual aspect of this creature.
Sure.
And it's got some interesting echoes of like the xenomorph, which would have predated it by about 4 or 5 years.
That his shop worked on for at least Aliens.
Yeah. So here's my experience of watching Pumpkinhead. When they torch the body at the end, or the previous to the end, I thought, why do I not? I didn't know if it was a series. I didn't know if it was a series. I didn't know if there were more films.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you have a liking for it as a series, or does your affection primarily just rest with this first one?
It kind of drops off a sheer cliff after the first one, because
I did see Henriksen shows up in later.
He does, yeah. And I have to confess that I have seen the second one. It was years ago, and I don't have a strong memory for it. I had a notion when part 3 came out, because part 3 was direct to TV, and I think might have even been like direct to Sci-Fi Channel. And I had the notion that maybe I would watch it, but I got one like sort of trailer glimpse of the Pumpkinhead character, and it's like full bore CG kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when I saw that, it kind of turned me off a little bit. So maybe there's some, and I would certainly welcome this if there are listeners out there who have some affection for the following sequels, then definitely I'm pitchable and could be convinced to watch them. But I just have to be honest that I have not watched 3 and 4, and I didn't have a strong affection for 2. So my affection for, as opposed to in preparation for this episode, I watched this one twice.
Right.
I love it so much.
I'm risking just steering us right into the pumpkin patch here. But what made me affectionate towards the film, one, is the originality. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Is it based on any pre-existing something or other?
No, it's an original. It was inspired by a poem by a man named of Ed Justin, I think, and it was inspired. It was literally just a spark of. They had this poem, and I forget exactly the context in which this poem was introduced to one of the producers, and they were like, "Hey, they literally, like a writer for hire. Hey, we've optioned the rights to this. Can you make a script out of this little poem here?" And it's the poem that the kids say, when they're circling around the kid they're trying to freak out. So yeah,
I guess I want to walk through production and pedantics if we want to, but it's the end. It's the end that kind of sealed the deal for me of like, okay, this is kind of special.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
And by that I mean the literal end. And so if you haven't watched it, one, it's an hour and a half. Glory be.
80
Do it again. No wonder you watch it twice. I'm like, show me another one.
Yeah.
So not only is it a breezy hour and a half, but it's not overly schlocky. It's got some earmarks of kind of the serial killer motif, again, because it's multiple people die in semi-brutal fashion, but even then it's a little fantastical. But as you outlined, the premise is man suffers grievous misfortune, in this case the death of his son in a dreadful motorbike accident by others, and
Yeah.
enter the fantasy element. He goes ostensibly and just finds the witch just randomly out in the woods, who instructs him on how he can exact his revenge by getting this Pumpkinhead character. So he has to go out to this pumpkin patch. He digs up this embryonic cadaver thing,
Yeah.
and comes back with it to the witch. She performs this incantation, utilizing blood from him and the past child, and summons forth the Pumpkinhead. Now, who then proceeds to wreak havoc against this troop of teenagers who harmed this man. Now, the specialness of the film becomes, you realize the character Ed, played by Lance Henriksen, has this kind of psychic link to the Pumpkinhead, which is not told to him as part of his deal here. And so as part of it, he ends up, as I referenced, trying to short circuit the cycle once he realizes this and kind of experiences compunction for his action. Well, it ends, and I'm just building to explaining the end so I can illustrate how special it kind of steps into, is he asks, ultimately, in realizing what's at stake, he gets one of the remaining surviving teenagers to kill him, to shoot him.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, the film ends with, yes, these kids surviving or whatever, and the body of Pumpkinhead torched,
burning, right?
But the literal film ends, the final scene is the witch out in the pumpkin patch, burying the now misshapen towards Pumpkinhead-esque body of Ed.
Yeah, and it's him, right?
And that, I was like, oh snap, that's good.
Yes, yeah, and it is. It's like, that's what the film has, and in the in like the special features of the Blu-ray edition, that Shout Factory has a really great Blu-ray collector's edition of this piece with some really great special features in it, and in those special features, they echo it almost too much to where they're kind of like beating the horse a bit, about the moral center at this narrative's heart. That it really is very much this sort of meditation on the price and the cost and the cyclical nature of vengeance, and how it just sort of plants seeds that are going to continue to destroy your life and destroy the lives of countless others. Because it's worth noting that he knows to go and seek this woman, this old witch, out, because as a child he saw the creature through the window take out somebody else. And so he's, this mythos has kind of reverberated in his psyche for all these years. And I think it's pretty profound when you begin to kind of dig into it, and definitely ahead of its time. One of the things, and this maybe can edge up to just the couple of little trivial bits I was going to mention, it was double featured. Pumpkinhead was double featured up against Child's Play, and Child's Play was one of like the big tent poles of studio marketing, so it got like all the press at the time. So it was relatively underseen in the theater, but it became a big hit on video when a lot of people were, just checking it out, as many films did at that point. One of the things that I think is really remarkable about the production, and then I'll pivot this into, you used the word earlier, special, that this film is kind of special. It is said by literally every interview I can find that this was one of the most bright, lighthearted, and could not have counted the times the word fun was used.
I saw that.
Of a set. That just everybody had fun. Stan Winston, legend in the makeup effects world, had a reputation for wanting to keep his sets fun. He wanted his team to work hard, but he was very passionate about, go home to your family, and I'll pay you overtime when you can't go home to your family, because I need you rested. And when you're here, I want you to be here, and I want you to enjoy being here, because your work will improve if you enjoy being here. And they said that's the energy that he brought to the set, and that his just care for the actors and just the way he navigated. I guess there was one particularly tense moment where they couldn't get a part of the mechanics of the creature to work, and they were stressing out a little bit because they were running a little late, a little ground on time. And one of the effects guys was sitting there trying to work the mechanism on it. And when they looked over at Stan in the corner watching them. And when they saw Stan, they said he had tilted his glasses on his head and was making a funny face. And they said, that's the director telling me to lighten up, not, oh my gosh, hurry this up. We got to, and it just, the whole thing just endeared me all the more to Stan Winston, who passed away, I think, in the late 2000s. And it just, everything about it just endeared me to him all the more for hearing those kinds of stories. But getting back to the specialty of the narrative, like this is a film that has a tremendous amount of moral gravity on its mind, and in ways that I think you could almost edge up a little bit into pretension, trying to kind of wrangle it all down, when I also think if you weren't interested in all the moral gravity that it has to offer, it's also a really effective, scary thriller. But yeah, it does. It has a tremendous amount of substance at its root in the subject of engine.
If you'll permit, maybe as a touch point on more lighthearted elements before we fully, go. I want to go wherever you want to, but
yeah, sure.
As maybe a summary and representative question that gets us at the frothier parts of the film before we get into the more meat on the bones. What's your favorite kill in this film?
Oh, man, that's a tough one.
Do you want to think?
I want to think for a second.
Okay.
If you've got one. Yeah.
I
want
do.
to think for a second.
Because it's funny. I think about like a film like Freaky, which there are several inventive or kind of creative kills there, but none I would be like, okay, that's impressive. Unlike this, which is Muppet Maggie at the window.
Oh,
when the creature is playing puppet doll, paper doll with her head, and then smashes it into the glass.
Oh.
That was rough.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
I was like, that poor girl.
Oh my gosh. And I think mine, because it was between, you've just solved it for me, because I was going back and forth between, do I mention that one or do I mention the other one? So I'll cite as my favorite kill is Joel's exit after he had so arrogantly busted up there and he was like, and they're like, you don't know that it's dead. You don't know. And he blasts it into the head and he's like, it's dead. And suddenly the thing like gets up, but there's that image. We cannot praise the creature design enough. There's that image, that great shot where Pumpkinhead has the rifle, but he kind of like tilts it this direction and he's turning his head kind of sideways, and it's just, it's so creepy. And then he plunges the rifle through Joel's middle and like shish kebabs him up in the air. And then afterwards, where he's like playing with the limp head, where he's just like the head keeps falling back, and that
was creepy.
Yeah, it's just this beast. This Pumpkinhead demon is gnarly. Like, he looks terrifying and he is absolutely brutal. One thing that's kind of interesting, I had written this down maybe to touch on in some more substantive points, so I'll just hit and run it for the moment. What's interesting is the one moment that kind of gave a lot of the cast and crew some pause is when Pumpkinhead carves the cross into Maggie's face. And there were some concerns, and in the special features I watched, they didn't dive too much beyond saying there were some concerns, but there were some concerns, I guess, of a sacrilege in some of the portrayals of like what Pumpkinhead does. And I do want to kind of, or possibly, if it goes there, want to kind of explore that a little bit. But I thought that was really interesting. Particularly, you mentioned Maggie's death, and she is one of the few characters in the film that is directly referenced as a person of faith. She has that cross.
Right.
Steve, points out, he's like, you've always found your hope in this, and so there's definitely like some religious thought on the film's mind, but it manifests itself in some
and even the showdown in the abandoned church,
Yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I don't know. For me personally, and this is, I didn't do any external sourcing like you did with the Blu-ray and stuff like that. So this is purely just, sometimes when I see stuff like that, especially in older material, I give it a little bit of a long rope, because I'm like, I don't know if you guys really know what you're talking about, but you're giving lip service to it, so I'm fine. You know, like I just don't think overly hard about it, other than just, that's interesting.
Makes sense. So I do want to reference, just before we get too deep into some substantive things, one really big love, although it's like heartbreaking, and then a really big fear. The relationship between Ed and his son, I think, is handled very well in the film, because it's pretty believable. It's kind of heartbreaking, the notion that these two are really all each other has, because for reasons that the film doesn't unpack for us, Ed lost his wife sometime before this. We don't know when. We just know, based on that scene towards the end, because when you first see them, you just know it's a father and son, but mom's not in the picture. We don't really know why. And it's not until later in the film that he visits her grave and, tells her they killed him, honey, and so they've been through such tremendous tragedy. But God, it chokes me up every single time that he's cleaning his son, like right after the bike accident, and he's like trying to wash his face, and he's trying to tell him that story that apparently they repeat often, where the man has a very special son, and it's just that rips my heart out every time.
Well, and this is why I would say this is better than people would assume, based on its age, based on some of the imagery, if you haven't seen it. But like you just referenced this, it's not just there are a lot of component pieces in that first half hour that signal thoughtfulness. And one is, and I joked a little bit, in truth, I hadn't really seen Lance Henriksen in much besides Alien, right?
He's in Aliens.
Yeah, okay, Aliens. And, I didn't watch it really, but I know he's in Millennium because it crossed over with X-Files.
Sure, right.
Shout out, Ned. So I haven't seen him in much, but I know who he is, and he's very good in this role.
Yeah.
And they don't play it for melodrama, which is impressive.
Right.
They play it really straight. But it has all the makings of saccharine and dumb. In other words, it's like the cutest kid in the world. It's Jonathan Lipnicki circa Jerry Maguire. It's like, really? You got this kid and you got that handsome dad, and they're like just palling around out on the the plains of wherever they're at, and they run their little grocery store. And but things like the scene you just referenced, it's not just that dialogue, which is fantastic, or monologue as it were. It's how that scene is realized visually. I mean, it is a beautiful moment where
very well lit. Yeah.
Yes. The lighting from the back. That is one just pure production thing I'll credit on the film, besides the creature design, is the lighting. The first romp of Pumpkinhead through the wilds of the first 5 minutes, it's dark and purple and blue outside. It's red and sharp inside. So no, there's a lot of thoughtfulness at work here. And so the production notes were, yes, echoing what you're saying about that scene, but also, actually, it's funny, I was thinking about this after the movie, like what frustrates me sometimes about when you really like something and think something is done well, but then it's hard for you to figure out how you would articulate why you think it's done well.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Every episode of The Fear of God.
Yeah, like, I don't know, but I love it. I don't know why, but they do it right.
Yes.
Well, this is one of those moments. The scene at the grocery store, when the different parties start showing up, and why that scene is really strong. I had not seen the film before. I hadn't watched the trailer.
Sure.
I didn't really know the narrative arc.
Yeah.
but something bad is gonna happen.
It's about to happen. Right.
But the way they draw that out, this, even the teenagers are split into two parties. So one party shows up, the second half of their party show up, the poor family with their dozen kids show up. All these, for what is a quiet film up until that point, besides the teaser, all these people are suddenly populating the scene, and you're like, man, they are taking their time with this, and it is nail biting, because I don't know what's going to happen, but I know it's bad.
Something bad. Yeah. Something bad.
So I don't know, just real credit to whatever the thing is they do there.
Well, and I'll also say, like, so two more little bits. First of all, in those little kids, the sort of the poor kids that are running around, did you notice little baby Blossom in there?
I didn't. It's funny, subconsciously I did, and then I saw her name later on.
Yeah. I think this was her first film. Also, that dog Gypsy is the same dog in Gremlins, which I thought was funny. But what specifically is really kind of interesting about the way Stan Winston approached this. And again, this may be the last time on the episode that I really like sing his praises to this degree, but he could have been a real control freak about everything, but he was very invested in wanting to make sure that his job as director was on point. So for like effects team and everything, he went to his effects team for Pumpkinhead and said, I'm the client. I'm the director. You guys come to me with the effects design. He said, I'll tell you what I want, but you treat me like the client. I'm not the boss now. I'm the client. And then you show me what you've got, and really gave his effects team an opportunity to shine. The reason I'm bringing that up is because I think that decision on his part left him free to make a lot more of those little like narrative tweaks. Specifically, the substance of where the narrative goes is actually a bit darker than it was in the original script. And that's a lot of just sort of his vision kind of pushing it forward a little bit. I didn't mention this earlier. I said I had two things. I mentioned the sun thing. The second thing is, almost as frightening as the Pumpkinhead demon itself is friggin' Haggis, the old witch lady.
Man.
Like those shots of her like looking into the fireplace, that deep crimson red.
You can go now, Ed Harley.
Oh my gosh,
now
it's so great. God, it's so great. And then she's sitting there talking to him, and the stillness. What is that actor's name? Oh my gosh, her name is Florence Schaeffler. And she's just like a statue standing there, but like her lines produce so much power, and there's a huge makeup effect on her. That makeup, I guess, weighed like 65 pounds. I mean, it was just a lot. But she's just producing so much energy just in her stillness. And I love, this could have easily edged into like campiness, but when he's in there after Pumpkinhead has killed a couple of people, and he comes back in and he's like, not like this, and he's like going so manic, but she's still just very still, and she's still just like really controlled, and she's just telling him like, look, you started this has got to,
but you won't, Ed Harley.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
The first time she entered the scene, my scares note was just creepy old lady in her creepy old cabin with her creepy dancing owl and her creepy spiders and her creepy wispy hair.
Just everything about it creepy.
Yeah.
But and then like that, and sensitivity for some of our listeners who wouldn't want me to quote this, but like, there's even a line like this that might be viewed as kind of cheesy, but when he tells her, he says, GDU, and then, she says back to him, she says, he already has.
Yeah.
But she says it with like a glee in her voice. It's really, really unnerving. But she's like, he already has. And it's just like, there's a lot from the moment he carries. And I think maybe that's one of the things that really connects to me, is because I'm like, man, what would you do? What would you do in this situation? These kids, if you want to use this vernacular, these punk kids have taken the last good thing you had in this world, and you have a path to unleash literal hell on them, and with abandon to the cost it's going to pay to your own soul. And I think there's something really compelling about that notion. And from the moment he carries the body of his son in there, Lance Henriksen had said, you probably saw this if you did some trivia digging, but he said it more than once in the little special features I watched. He said that at first he heard the title and he was like, Pumpkinhead, what is this dumb thing? But his agent had sent it to him. And so he's sitting there, he's reading the script. But he said the moment that the son sits up in the car and looks at him and says, "What'd you do, Daddy? What'd you do?" And he said when he was reading it, just chills hit the back of his neck, and he knew he had to be a part of this project, because that does speak a little bit to the thoughtfulness and what this film has on its mind.
Right.
That I think is just terribly, terribly impressive.
Well, if you'll permit a sort of where you just left that feels like it invites something that was on my mind to throw out for both of us here is
sure
is like what would it have taken to save Ed?
And God have mercy.
And I guess, like, because I think what's so, you alluded this a few minutes ago about the darkness by the end of it. Like, when you really start to unwind what's happening in that final scene, it's not dreadful because it's a creepy old witch burying a weird looking thing in a weird pumpkin patch. Like, that's text. Like, what is the subtext here? The subtext is you have just locked yourself into some generational wickedness that is now inescapable because of this one terrible thing. And, I don't want to flirt too nihilistic, but it's like, damn, he tries.
Yeah,
he tries.
He does.
And at the very least succeeds in sort of salvaging those kids who remain.
Saves 2 of the lives.
But
right. 3 of them.
In terms of what he has unwittingly locked himself into, I mean, like, what? Anyway, so that was something that just came to me. It was like, what saves this guy?
So that was
the world of the film.
I won't have a good answer to that, but I want to wrestle with it a little bit.
Yeah.
One of the images that stays in my mind so profoundly when I think about this movie is the image, obviously, when they go back to that like barn or whatever, where the climax of the film takes place. And he opens his eyes and it's those bloodshot, really possessed
it's a great
kind of eyes.
Moment.
But the moment when he's walking out and he has that flamethrower, because that's what he says to her. He says, I don't know how to kill it. Or he says, I don't know how to stop it. Gosh, I should have written the line down, and I've seen it like a dozen times. But the part of the line that stands out to me, he says, I'm going to send it back to whatever hell it came from. And when he realizes as he's stepping out and the pitchfork catches his shoulder, and when the pitchfork catches his shoulder and then the Pumpkinhead monster reacts in pain, it dawns, and it's such a chilling image because he's got those bloodshot eyes, those possessed kind of eyes, and it dawns on him in his haunted visage. It dawns on him, this is how I stop this, is I stop me. I end me to stop this. And that is such a horrific and terrifying sort of revelation for us to ponder, because one of the things that I was going to wrestle with, and it's adjacent to this whole what would it take to save Ed, because I was going to ask perhaps an even loftier question of what does justice look like in this situation? Like, what does good look like? Because sure, he can hold these kids to account for the loss of his son, but he still lost his son. Like the void that would exist in his world.
My knee-jerk reaction, which is pithy and maybe overused at this point, but the weight of which could never be overstated. You ask, what does justice look like, or what does peace look like? And damn it, it's include and forgive. And oh my God, like that's the holy work. Meaning, here's the moment, Reed. The moment when Ed becomes unsalvageable in the universe of this film is when he's cradling him in that pastoral moment on the bed, and that final murderous look that comes to him.
Yeah.
And that's it.
That's right. Yeah.
And because, again, the text of the old woman burying him at the end is just a thing. The subtext is what matters. The text of this grief-stricken man adopting a murderous look that we would all empathize with. And there's some specificity to this that can be blown up to address the question you're scratching at, which is what's happening to him right there is heinous wickedness that he has observed in his own life with his own eyes. He knows he can attempt to utilize to his own ends.
He can aim it. Yes.
But all I'm trying to point out is, and this is where we elevate into the us of it all and the listenership of it all and the real world of it all, is when we adopt the methods of wickedness, what we're doing is short-circuiting our own health and maturity and growth and wisdom and enlightenment and Christ-likeness waiting to be birthed. We short-circuit that by saying, you know what? I know I saw this thing that time.
Yeah.
And it'll F them up just like I saw it F the other people up. So I'm going to do it. You know what I mean? Like when you switch, when you flip that switch.
And what you're scratching at right now, this is going to sound random, but I'm going to break it back through. Do you remember, it might have even been in our old Professor Keith's class, where he talked about I remember hearing somewhere where it said the climax of a story does not necessarily have to come at the end of, or, in the final moments of it. That the climax for like Hamlet is actually in the middle when he's doing the to be or not to be speech, because that's when he makes the decision: do I end me or do I end them?
Right.
That's the choice of the path that we're going on. And a comparable moment is in the middle that you're talking about, is where, and as you're articulating it, it adds a little bit more weight than I think I even felt the first time, or the multitude of times through I've seen it, is where he brings his son in, and she said, "It ain't in my power to raise the dead." And then she goads him, say it. What do you want? Say it. And he's tormented as he's sitting there, even slams his fist against the mantle. He's tormented by that notion of like, she's like, what do you want? Why are you here? And then it's after she coaxes him probably 2 or 3 times of say it, that he goes in exactly what you just sort of articulated. I've seen this thing and I'm going to do it. I'm going to point this hellish vengeance at these people, and I'll do it, whatever it is. And from that, and that's his damnation right there, is that moment. And even what's so tragic about it, as energizing as it is, and it is as a film viewer, it's really energizing the moment that Pumpkinhead, that I referenced earlier, that Pumpkinhead is ambling down the road, and then he's shot, and the camera turns over, and it's Ed. It's Ed trying to defend them, and that's a very sort of energetic moment, because that's where the table kind of turns on what you think you're seeing. He's not embracing it anymore. He's trying to stop it,
right?
But it's too late to stop.
Yeah.
The moment
you're looking at a dead man walking.
Absolutely, it's only and she even says, when he tries to say, like, not like this, and he says, then fine, I'll do it myself. And she said, and pay the price all the sooner, pay the ultimate price all the sooner. You know,
Yeah.
this was always where it was headed.
Right.
You know, it's like that's the really haunting thing about it is that what world do we finish the narrative out if he doesn't intervene? What happens to the Pumpkinhead demon after he's fulfilled it? Does Ed just get to go back to his grocery store or something? No, it was always that he will become this, because it's this transformation that is happening regardless of his intervention. He is becoming this thing. He's becoming this sort of shriveled husk. So when she said it extracts a terrible price, like that's it. And the cost of not, because we can talk all we want to about the painful cost of including and forgiving, but the cost of not doing it, the cost of instead aiming vengeance and wrath
Right.
at everything. And
I wouldn't say there's cost to including and forgiving. I said there's work to it. Yes,
Well,
there's
yes,
absolutely
sure,
cost
sure.
to the opposite. It's interesting. It's funny because what you're conjuring for me is, and this will be weird in the way we record these podcasts, but I'm reading Thomas Merton's book Seeds of Destruction right now. Spoiler alert for next week's Watches. But there's this moment in there that really just struck me profoundly. I think it was in there. It wasn't the roar. I just finished. I don't read as many as you do, so they all start to run together. But rib.
yeah, felt it.
Where he basically is articulating what does it mean? What does it mean? Not so much to be Christian, but like what does faithfulness mean practically? And he distills all these things down, and ultimately read what he lands on is intention. Intention. He's like, you can metaphysic all this stuff, you can mythologize all this stuff, but at the end of the day, the measure is intention.
Yeah.
And why I'm bringing that in right here is why this film is so interesting to me is it basically tells the story. What happens when you unleash hell is that you ultimately just inhabit it. You now live it. You own it, because the intention was to do it. Now, we can occasionally regret our intentions, and that is a conversation.
Right.
This movie isn't about trying to subvert it. It's about the cautionary tale of what happens when you do intend it. But
right.
I think something that I've, kind of in the spirit of body and spirit, freaky conversation, something that I've kind of come to these last years is like, when we talk about heaven and hell, we can talk till we're blue in the face about ethereal afterlife destinations, but to do that circumvents and waters down, and if anything, robs the concepts of heaven and hell from their truest meaning, which is you're perpetuating one of those here and now. And
right.
We can mythologize a fire-ridden red hell and still not understand that our intentions here can wreak it all around us.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Anyway,
I'm so galvanized by the, like, when you unleash hell, you inhabit it. That is worth our pause, and that is worth our recognition in this conversation, because I will hit this, and maybe this will be my final observation for this conversation about the film, because God knows I love this film greatly and could talk about it ad infinitum, but I do want to go back to the fact that in the film, he carves a cross onto Maggie's face. He enters the church, and for a film that is very short and tight, there's at least a few seconds where he picks up the cross, like the wooden cross inside the church, and is clearly very, irritated, agitated, antagonistic towards it, and smashes it and smashes the cross. And I think this second half of the film is this sort of unleashing. This is a very kind of lofty statement, but it's like we either choose to go the path of what I would call the cross, which is, as we've expressed on the show before, the only acceptable loss is our own, and bear the burden of include and forgive for ourselves, and we either go that path, or we unleash hell, and at that point, it may be perhaps, like, I don't ever want to talk about like, oh, it's too late or something, because I just don't see things that way. But it's very, very difficult to disembody yourself from hell once you are inhabiting it. Once you have embraced wickedness, it is dreadfully difficult to disentangle yourself from all of that in such a way. And I don't want to imply that you reach places beyond redemption, because I also don't really necessarily believe that. But I think in the ways in which you and I, minded the way we are, would want to lean forward on redemptive possibilities, and rightfully so. I think the risk we run is in perhaps diminishing the cautionary sort of statements around how far things can go if you do not repent and turn from embracing wicked ways. Like, and when I say wicked ways, I'm not talking about pedantic, superficial sins. I'm talking about a deep, abiding,
Sure.
like, embracing of toxic, destructive, just vast amounts of violence and hatred, and you could talk about the 7 deadly sins if you want to encompass that, just the envy and the arrogance and the wrath and all of those kinds of things that just they foster hell in the world around you and in your own spirit. And at that point, it really becomes a place to where you, as you put it earlier, you become part of the cycle of how much more that is going to, we've talked before on the show in positive ways about the way that generations will reap what we sow here and now. Our sons and daughters, their grandchildren, or, our grandchildren, their children will reap the seeds that we choose to plant in either in ways that will shade and comfort and provide fruit and goodness, or a mound in Razorback Hollow that is only to be completely dredged up in these patterns of vengeance and destruction. And what it really comes down to for me is you have to stop. Man, this is too lofty. I don't know if I could live up to this. I'm going to make the statement because I believe it to be true, but I don't know if I could live up to it. Just calling myself out in the moment. You have to learn how to recognize that the loss itself can only be sort of paid back, reconciled, made right by a path towards forgiveness and a path towards fighting for a more productive justice, as opposed to kill them all, as opposed to like the slaughterhouse. And I feel like in so many ways, the fight that we're in right now for our own souls can so quickly become about conquering and overcoming this very sort of battle language. And there is the very pithy old phrase about how an eye for an eye eventually leaves everyone blind. That's what that path leads, which is why, to bring in some very specific scriptural reference as a point of laying it down, something you said several episodes ago still resonates in my spirit. So I'll reference a scripture and then quote Mr. Nathan Rouse, my good friend, where Jesus said, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you. And he is taking it a lot of times like the eye for an eye, and we've talked about this before. An eye for an eye is kind of viewed as like, well, yeah, that's justice, right? You took my eye, I'm going to take yours. But actually, in the original texts, it was meant to be a restriction. It was meant to be like, hey, they took your eye, so you can't take their head. Like it was meant to be like a restrictive thing.
Narrow the
right
return.
And Christ was taking it further. They took your eye. I'm telling you, love them. I'm telling you, do good to them and bless them.
Mm-hmm.
And something that you have said in an episode, I can't remember which one, but you said, you have to love your enemies to the degree that now you have no enemies. Like that's so much the point.
Right.
We love our enemies so that we have no enemies. We give away our possessions so that nothing possesses us. We relinquish and we navigate and listen, I get it. The film is challenging in these ways because the man lost his son and he lost his son to a selfish SOB who just doesn't want to go back to jail. Like I get it. This is not some minor infraction. This is his world that was shattered, but that is the hard work, is because you can look at the weight of the loss and it would be so easy to just be like, oh my God, give him hell. Literally give him hell. Unleash demonic fury upon them, not realizing until God help us, it is too late, that the price we have chosen to pay is our own soul, And so when we would point, and one of the things I was going to ask is like, who does the real wrong here? Is it the kids who took his son from him? Is it Ed? Or is it Haggis who perpetuates a path that can unleash all of these things? And I don't really want to unpack all of that right now, but I think it's worth reflecting in our own life in the way that we cling to grudges and cling to our loss. And I'm definitively not saying you don't fight for reconciliatory justice. I am not saying that. I am not saying just, suck it up and let it go. That's the farthest thing from what I'm talking about. But I am talking about it is our own soul at peril when we adopt and embrace unrestricted vengeance.
Yes.
And say, okay, I'm going to unleash hell on these people who have done me such egregious wrong.
As a final note for me, I think the film is pretty impressive as it currently exists, but something that just popped into my mind, because the way the film ends sort of cements the darkness of the cycle. And maybe this would have been too saccharine, but something inspired by just our conversing about it that popped in my head was, what if you have the film play out the way it does? Haggis buries the dread version of Ed.
Yeah.
That fade to black. And then you cut back to Ed weeping over his son in the bed. In other words, it's all been him envisioning
what
vengeance would be and what that would cost, and instead chooses something different. That's interesting to ponder, but I think, again, it's maybe too saccharine for what the movie's after, but
sure, right, I understand. Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing invites those sorts of ponderings. So
no, absolutely. Yeah. And it's it's a film that, if you haven't heard me say it enough, like it's a film that's really special to me. And I love it quite a bit. It's still, its implications still haunt and scare me and challenge me when I am tempted to hold grudges and hold people into, profound account, as it were.
Now and then when you're driving and you've got like murder in your heart, just imagine me sitting next to you going, "Why'd you do it, lackey?"
Wow. You just sit up.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God.
I'm sorry.
What'd you do?
What'd you do? That's it. Yeah.
So you want to explain the fog meter to people?
The fog meter is our very own special brew, like haggis in the haggis in the hut, clowns in the cornfield. Everybody's everywhere. Their own little special abode. Here we have the fog meter, we measure films on metrics of fear and God, how scary a thing is, how substantive a thing is. I want you to go first with fear because it's your what scares us, and I'm curious kind of how 41. You're not 41 yet. 40-year-old.
40. Don't age me before my time.
Well,
I'm 40.
I like to think we're running alongside each other like
That
those
is
two
true.
kids from
That is
that
true.
book, but then I forget you're a year behind me, and you just need to get on the carousel and catch up, or I need to get on it and go back.
So,
come on, dude! I just gave you like a something wicked this way comes, like deep cut, and you just let it pass right by.
I apologize. You know what? That I can tell you've read the book. I can tell. I can tell you really loved it. Yeah. Something wicked this way comes. Indeed.
Common cause, brother.
Yeah, love is the common cause. So for fear, it's tough because I watch this film now not for frights.
Sure.
So it's difficult in that way, but I can go back to when I first saw it, and I do think the fear factor is pretty high for it. I'm in the way. If I was just rating the film's effectiveness as a thriller, I would probably give it a 7. My existential fears of the narrative depths that it has would probably land at a 10. So I'm gonna split the difference and do 8.5.
Okay. I think the impressive nature of the creature design,
very much so,
would be like an auto 5 points on this scale. Honestly, it's Haggis burying him at the end, and I'm like, just ratchets the fear factor way up in terms of the existential nature of it, and the things you and I like to think about and like to talk about. Like the movie could have ended without that scene. The movie could have ended
right out in the field when he's the body burning or something.
Yeah, and just he did it, the tragic hero. But it doesn't, and what it chooses to show in her doing that just elevates. I think I'll give it an 8 on the fear.
Nice, very nice. You mind if I go first for God?
Just like Ed trying to break the circuit here. Do whatever you want, Reed. It's your what scares us. It's good. It's all good.
So I'm gonna be generous because I love the film a lot, and I'm going to go for 10 for this because, in that way that somebody might balk at, like, why are you giving Pumpkinhead a 10? I'm like, look, the film has got a lot on its mind. It's clearly very thoughtful and very thought provoking. And so in that spirit where I love the film and I love it for a lot of these reasons, I'm going to go ahead and go for 10 for the God meter. What say you, Mr. Rouse?
I'm going to go 9. I've only seen it once. I mean, I think that final scene is the linchpin that not only elevates the scare factor, but kicks the door wide on like, wow, this is really trying to state something strong about of our intentions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that means that we give oh my God, I'm so happy. This makes me so happy. We give Pumpkinhead, one of my favorite horror films. We give it a 9 out of 10 on the fog meter. That is there.
I love how for this episode you came ready to come to blows over how you were ready to defend. You were ready to just put on the tie on the mitts and take Nathan out and be like, I'm going to defend my film here, but I'm here.
No, because I always, when a film is really special to you, you're ready for people to you want to see, or people to see what you find special about it.
Yeah.
So it just makes me really happy, very validating, and obviously I'm thrilled you enjoyed it. So yeah, would you recommend Pumpkinhead?
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Easy. I mean,
Clearly, I would.
Anyone who listens to our show and enjoys what we do and hasn't seen it, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fantastic, and I think in that way that if as you can sometimes get in the mood for like that 80s era kind of monster flick, Pumpkinhead could easily be found in the Upside Down. He's born of that kind of substance. So I definitely highly recommend Pumpkinhead for obvious reasons. And so that brings this episode to a close. If you will permit me, just about maybe 45 seconds here. That was completely unexpected. listeners may have heard me reference past couple of weeks a good friend of mine who has been battling a sickness, an illness, and I was very saddened to learn this past week, as you're listening to this, that my good friend Randy Ashburn has moved on, and he's left us. He leaves behind a profound legacy of love and of faith, and he was a very, very special friend to me, and I'm very, very sad that he's no longer with us. I bring him up to reference one of his little catchphrases that he would say to so many of us. There would be times where we were hanging out in his house, and there would be a big group of like a dozen or so of us, and he would say, "Okay, stop for a second and look around and just bask in the wonder of the fact that our stories couldn't finish without each other." And
Lovely.
And I think that's really special, and it's really lovely. And I know listeners are not going to automatically know who he is, but I wanted to sort of formally put it out there that I loved Randy and still love him, and very, very sad that he's gone, and express in honor and tribute to him, and in a spirit that I still embrace, that I'm thankful for you, Nathan, very, very much. And I want to sit in this moment, even by extension, maybe to our listeners in the wider podcast world, and just ponder for a second how our stories couldn't have finished without each other. And I'm really thankful for that. And I think that's really lovely. And as we say on every episode that we can, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, and it is not the end of the conversation. And in that spirit, we encourage you, dear listener and dear friends, to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing. And next week, we will be having a very special What Scares Us with a very special guest. If you want to check it out, you will go to find 47 Meters Down, the Mandy Moore and Claire Holt shark film, and
Matthew Modine.
Matthew Modine's in it. He is
Sort of.
so, for a couple scenes. So check out 47 Meters Down, and we'll see you right back here next week. Nathan, as always, thank you very, very much, my friend.
Absolutely. See you guys.
Bye. Sorry, I know I curveballed you.
Dude, you're fine. You're
At
fine.
the end, but
I used to like think we were leaving stuff on the floor by not doing 2-hour episodes. Now I'm like, oh yeah.
yeah, man, it feels nice. But I think the biggest thing, I mean, it helps me to do the pre-brief. And then I think the other big thing is just our question asking is really
Fun.
It's good. Yes, it works really well, and it feels nice. I look at it, I feel like the conversation is substantive and has been had, and I look at it and it's like an hour and 20 minutes, and that feels great. So
It does.
yes, absolutely. Hope you have a good night, and I will chat with you soon, my friend.
See you, brother.